Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you care about Canada's future, you won't want to miss what's happening in the West right now. In 2025, the idea of Canadian unity is no longer taken for granted. A quiet storm has been building for years. Now, it's roaring through the prairies and sweeping west toward the Pacific. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia. 4 provinces, each with its own frustration. But now, something new is happening. They're aligning. It began subtly, provincial premiers issuing joint statements, demanding more autonomy over natural resources, taxation, immigration, and pensions. But behind closed doors, it has evolved into something far more serious. There are now whispers of coordinated action, and even breakaway strategies. Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta has taken the boldest steps so far. After pushing forward Alberta's Sovereignty Act, she lowered the threshold for referendums. And now, for the first time, her government is openly discussing the possibility of a provincial vote on full independence if Ottawa continues to overreach. In Saskatchewan, Premier Scott Moe hasn't called for separation, but he's moved in lockstep with Alberta, echoing calls for a provincial police force, a pension plan, and even new trade and border agreements independent of federal systems. This isn't just politics anymore. It's strategy. Then there's Manitoba. Long viewed as a centrist province, Manitoba has now become a wild card. Under pressure from rural voters and Indigenous communities demanding more control over land and governance, the province is reassessing its relationship with Ottawa. Premier Carney faces increasing calls to pick a side, stay with Confederation or join the Western Bloc forming right next door. But the biggest shift may be coming from British Columbia. Historically progressive and outward-facing, BC has always stood apart. But a massive energy policy clash with the federal government, especially over LNG and port control, has pushed even BC business leaders and union heads to question their future in a centralized Canadian structure. Premier David Eby may not favor separation, but he's losing grip over a growing movement within his own province demanding autonomy. Now add Ottawa to the equation. Prime Minister Mark Carney has attempted to soothe tensions, offering roundtable discussions, federal transfers, and vague promises of reform. But the West isn't buying it. In fact, they see Carney's leadership as a continuation of what they call the Laurentian elite agenda, a vision of Canada that prioritizes Ontario and Quebec while treating the West as an afterthought. Polling across Alberta and Saskatchewan shows rising support for holding referendums. In some rural ridings, the number is over 60%. In British Columbia's interior and in Manitoba's rural south, it's climbing too. 4 provinces. One question: do they belong in this version of Canada? Financial experts warn that a 4-province alliance, if it were to materialize, could form the economic backbone of a breakaway Western Federation. Alberta and Saskatchewan control the lion's share of oil and gas. BC holds the ports, trade routes, and forestry. Manitoba provides a critical link to central Canada, and access to hydropower and agriculture. Together, these provinces account for nearly a third of Canada's GDP, and almost half of its exports. But the situation is about more than economics. It's about identity. About control. About whether Ottawa's decisions reflect the will of people thousands of kilometers away from Parliament Hill. The Trudeau years left behind scars, carbon taxes, pipeline cancellations, and long-standing debates about equalization payments. But under Mark Carney, many hoped things would change. So far, they haven't. And so, talks are escalating. Think tanks in Calgary, Regina, and Vancouver are modeling new forms of governance. Premiers are scheduling interprovincial summits without federal oversight. Western media is fueling the fire, publishing op-eds with titles like, "A Canada That No Longer Works," and "Time for a New Nation." No formal declaration has been made. No official documents signed. But in legislative offices and town halls, something irreversible may already be underway. Even Indigenous leaders, often excluded from federal-provincial negotiations, are now speaking out, demanding a say in what a reimagined Western nation might look like. The implications of a 4-province breakaway aren't just symbolic, they would be seismic. Every institution, from the Supreme Court to the Bank of Canada, would be thrown into legal chaos. Trade routes, defense agreements, pensions, even the national debt, none of it would be untouchable. The constitutional architecture that has held Canada together for over 150 years would face unprecedented strain, if not outright collapse. Behind the scenes, a new generation of political operatives is already gaming out what a post-Canada West would look like. Would it be a federation, with shared defense and economic strategy? Would each province retain full independence? Would they form a new bloc within a weakened Canada? Or, more drastically, would they seek trade or even diplomatic ties with foreign nations like the United States? And then there's the international reaction. Washington is watching this unfold with quiet interest. A fragmented Canada could mean new opportunities, access to energy, influence over trade infrastructure, and strategic control of Arctic routes. China, too, has an eye on BC's ports and critical minerals. In geopolitical terms, a fractured Canada is a vulnerable Canada. The timeline is unclear, but momentum is building. Alberta's government has already published legal frameworks for a provincial pension plan and police service. Saskatchewan's education ministry has begun crafting its own curriculum standards, independent of federal influence. Manitoba's rural municipalities are openly debating resolutions to reduce federal programming. In BC, anti-Ottawa protests have emerged not just in resource towns, but even in suburban communities outside Vancouver. Ottawa, meanwhile, is struggling to contain the narrative. Prime Minister Mark Carney has proposed a new Confederation dialogue, a series of closed-door meetings to discuss provincial grievances. But premiers are refusing to attend unless real power transfers are on the table. The Prime Minister has also faced sharp criticism from within his own party for underestimating the anger brewing across the West. The political class in Ottawa sees these moves as threats. But out west, they're seen as acts of survival. And now, there's talk of a coordinated referendum, not in one province, but in all four, on the same day. It's just an idea, for now. But if that date gets set, it could mark the single most significant moment in Canada's modern history. As tensions rise and rhetoric intensifies, the clock is ticking. Canada's unity is not guaranteed. And the choices made in the next 12 months may define the future not just of Alberta or BC, but of the entire nation. And if they move as one, if Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and British Columbia all take steps toward legal autonomy, shared policy, or even joint referendums, then Canada may face something it has never experienced in its modern history, fragmentation not just from Quebec, but from its entire western spine. This isn't just political friction. It's a constitutional rupture waiting to happen. And so, the question remains, are four provinces about to break away? And if they do, what happens to Canada next?